about it. Pound saws.
Drama and crisis follow the fortunes of world currencies. The level of the pound or the dollar excites the headline writers. But what do these shifts mean to industry? How do they affect our prosperity? In this programme, we first of all see what lies behind the price of pounds by looking at the mechanism of buying and selling currencies.
Change!
A quick phone call to a foreign exchange dealer, perhaps news of a country in crisis has come through, and the rate at which a currency exchanges for others is changed within minutes. Although governments can exert pressure on the exchange rate, in the end it's up to foreign exchange dealers to put a price on a currency, just like any other product, according to demand and supply. Like water flowing in and out of a lock. As water flows out, the level falls. As water flows in, the level rises. Similarly, the exchange rate of the pound depends on the amount of money flowing in and out of the economy. Foreign currency flowing into the economy, people buying pounds, raises the exchange rate. And they'd be buying those pounds mostly to buy our goods, our exports. So there you have the flow in one direction, but it goes the other way too, of course. People selling pounds to buy foreign currencies, which then flow out of the economy, lowers the exchange rate. There are several main elements in these inflows and outflows of currencies, but by far the largest are those caused by exports and imports of merchandise. As an island economy, we rely on selling part of our output overseas. We sweat and strain to provide a vast variety of so-called visible exports, merchandise ranging from oil and Scotch whisky to the humble steel bar. To pay for them, foreigners have to buy pounds, pushing up the exchange rate. Now, foreigners don't just buy steel bars, they also buy history, pomp and splendour when they come to Britain as tourists. While they're here, they dip into those pounds they've brought and set the cash tills ringing. For example, as they watch the mounted guards, the tourists have to think where to sleep, where to eat. And there are many other services or invisible imports that foreigners buy from us. For example, the expertise of the City of London in managing their investment and insurance requirements. And it all works the other way too. We earn foreign currency through the sale of visible and invisible exports, and we also spend it on imports. Take this British businessman returning from abroad. He's been running through our export earnings on quite a scale. He's already paid hard cash for his hotel bills abroad. What else has he been gathering up in that suitcase?
You can get it if you really want. You can get it if you really want.
Good job his suitcase isn't bigger. There's quite enough there to be going on with.
You'll succeed at last.
Quite sure, are you? That's the lot? What about that visit to the clothes store on your last day aboard?
All right, take me clothes. I'm patriotic, me. All right, I did buy a few, but only a few. Checking them off. Right. All right, then I bought a few. I'll check them off. I don't know.
It's not just exports and imports that affect the exchange rate. Next, there are flows of capital between countries. Suppose, for example, that a foreign firm's considering investing in the UK, a Japanese car company like Nissan. Then they'll need an awful lot of pounds to build a factory, install machinery, buy materials. So how would they set about getting them?
It's very simple, actually. What they would do, they would go to their bank in Tokyo and say, we wish to buy X millions of pounds against Japanese yen. That bank would then sell them those pounds at the current rate of exchange in exchange for yen. Some of the pounds may be required immediately, that is what we call spot, and some of it might be required in the future. But Nissans would be able to cover themselves today, to get a rate today, which would be binding on both them and their bankers for delivery at some future date. Those pounds would then be transferred to the United Kingdom by their Japanese bankers and put onto Nissan's account with a bank in this country. When the futures contracts, or the forward contracts, came to maturity, precisely the same thing would happen. Then Nissan would have X amount of pounds on their account, which they could then use to buy the property, the equipment, and to pay the staff.
To pay for this investment, foreigners have to buy sterling with foreign currency, a further inflow into the UK economy. But similarly, British foreign investment is an outflow that helps to reduce the exchange rate. Now let's look at one of the places where all this buying and selling of sterling takes place, the National Westminster Dealing Centre in London, with Bill Batt explaining how it operates.
Well, all they're doing all day is sitting down at their desks with telephones to their ears, sometimes two telephones to their ear, one to a broker, one to a bank, and they will be buying from and selling to people who are calling, whether they're banks, individuals, or multinationals, or whoever. They will be adjusting their prices according to how their own position is. Let us take, for example, a customer comes on, a big multinational. He wants $50 million. Now, the bank itself hasn't got $50 million. It doesn't say to the customer, wait, I'll see if I can get them for you, because that customer is also putting our bank and every 3 or 4 other banks into competition. Whichever bank quotes the best price for the customer gets the business. So we've got to make a price which is competitive and hopefully one which we can cover, buy back at a profit. Having made that price, and if the customer then accepts it, we now have what we call a position. We are oversold $50 million. We have now got to get those dollars back because we want to have a square book, we want to be even as possible, and the way to do that is to bring down our buying price to attract people to sell to us. Equally, we will also lower our selling price because we don't want to sell any more.
With thousands, perhaps millions of pounds at risk, the teleprinter operator has to think fast.
Well, it's just after 8 o'clock here in the Royal Money Centre. I'm communicating with our offices in the Far East, that's Singapore, Hong Kong and Bahrain, for 2 reasons, really. One, to get an idea of the dealing activity there's been in the particular centres and what sort of day they've had themselves individually, and also to get a trend of the market conditions in their centres as compared with the closing rates that we had here in London. I'm now relaying our opening rates to them and also advising my dealers in the room of the current levels of rate in the market. Sterling business at 27 in Hong Kong.
So, 2 sets of factors affecting the price of pounds are imports and exports and investment. But apart from these business considerations, there's a third force at work on the exchange rate. Funds flowing from one financial centre to another in response to interest rates or uncertainty about the future exchange rate of a currency. For example, high interest rates stemming from Reagan's tight monetary policy, plus a view that the dollar's exchange rate would therefore rise in the future, led to a sizable flow of funds to the United States during 1981-82.
Oh yes, both in the short term and in the long term. A lot of money has gone onto Wall Street, a lot of it has gone into government securities in the United States. Obviously, if you can pick up 12, 13, 14% on a currency which is appreciating, and therefore you have the opportunity to take a capital gain as well, then money will flow in. Money flows like water to wherever interest rates are the highest.
More generally, financial movements depend on the confidence felt in a country's economic or political situation. Sometimes this may be irrational or based on rumour.
Oh yes, the market does respond to rumours, and very often the rates will move without anybody doing any business. Something happens and therefore we lower our prices. Somebody calls us, finds that our price is lower, thinks to himself, I can't understand why, but as a precaution, I'll move my price down. And this spreads quite rapidly. Communications are so good nowadays that as a result, the rates will move without anybody having done any business.
Or confidence may be founded on major political events like the day the crisis over the Falkland Islands led to the sending of a naval task force.
Well, the headline reads, Britain's Armada sails tomorrow. The immediate effect was felt really in the Far East, because that opened while we were still in bed on the Sunday night. And obviously the pound came under selling pressure from people in the Far East.
What does that mean, the pound coming under selling pressure?
People were selling pounds and buying other currencies, mainly the American dollar, because they were fearful that there was going to be war between the United Kingdom and Argentina. They were fearful that this would lead perhaps to a fall of the government in this country. They were fearful of the economic consequences. Obviously, to send an armada to the South Atlantic is a very expensive business. It's also bad, one can argue, for the economy. This would create a greater demand for armaments, shells and all that sort of stuff, and therefore money which should be going into industry was now going into armaments, and that is generally inflationary. Knowing from what little I do of the way the Treasury works and the way the Bank of England works, they were well aware of every action which they took in the military field and the political field would have on the economic field. So they were ready for it. And the way they reacted to that was to ensure that the Bank of England came in to buy these pounds which were being sold, thereby taking some of the pressure off the exchange rate. In other words, try to stabilize the value of the pound in terms of other currencies.
So, movements of short-term funds in the exchange markets, with money being shunted between the main financial centres. Financial movements into Britain, exports and foreign investment in the UK, all led up to a demand for pounds. Foreigners buying pounds with their own currency. This demand for pounds, this inflow of foreign currency, forces the value of the pound up. And similarly, when British firms set up or expand production in other countries, it causes a loss of foreign currencies, an outflow. Financial movements out of sterling, UK investment overseas, and imports all represent a supply of pounds coming onto the foreign exchange market as people buy foreign currencies. This outflow of foreign currencies lowers the level of the pound. Therefore, whether the pound rises or falls depends on the relative strengths of these inflows and outflows. In other words, on the demand for pounds and the supply of pounds. Well, so much for the way in which the price of pounds is set. But what are the effects of the exchange rate? A strong pound sounds favourable, and certainly British Tories thought so when they flooded into Miami in 1980 when the pound was riding high and exchanging for $2.4. In that summer of 1980, it suddenly became easy to lure the British holidaymaker away from the Spanish beaches. In the end, 100,000 Britons went off to swim in the Miami pools. They were quite simply towed there by the exchange rate that made America cheaper than it had been for years. So a high pound means that foreign services like tourism become relatively cheap. More important, it means a fall in the price of our imported food, materials and goods. And that's the main reason why Mrs. Thatcher's government, intent on reducing inflation, was not displeased with the high exchange rate of the early 80s, because it helped to keep down prices. But there were three other arguments put forward by monetarists in favour of a high exchange rate. The first was that because British exports were priced up, producers would have to make strenuous efforts to increase their efficiency in order to stay competitive. In some instances, this seems to have happened. Take this firm, Sieber Geigy, and their factory in Grimsby. They make a large range of chemicals and medicines, a major exporter competing against other multinational companies. So, to stay in business, let alone make a profit, the task of its managing director was to offset that high exchange rate with more efficiency.
First of all, it's made us fight harder for our existence. Since our main business goes in foreign exchange, and since we have not wanted to jeopardize the business by trying to get much higher prices, it means we've had to take the losses here. The other effect, of course, we saw this coming about 2 years ago, is that we've gone in for a productivity improvement much more hard than we used to do. That has been through cost savings, through more efficient operations, and also through technical innovation. Better processing, if you like.
But many other British manufacturers saw no way of increasing productivity by sufficient to offset the rise in export prices caused by the higher exchange rate. Second, it was hoped that firms, now finding it difficult to compete on price, would move upmarket, making new and superior products which would compete more on quality. Butler's Machine Tool Company in Halifax is an example of a firm that had to move upmarket and start making new and better machines.
Well, the machine tool market's changed a great deal over the last 20 years. 20 years ago, we were selling machine tools of a relatively low technical content, and many of our customers were in relatively underdeveloped countries, many of them in the old British Empire. These machines today are being built in low labour cost countries, and we can no longer compete in Britain making that sort of equipment. As a result, we have had to move upmarket to higher technology products, and we now have to attempt to sell these machines to the technologically developed markets in the world, to Western Europe, to North America, Japan, Australia, and countries such as that.
But against this had to be set the danger that, faced with a loss of competitiveness, British producers might simply withdraw from export markets altogether. And a third argument for a high exchange rate was that it encouraged British producers to hold back increases in domestic costs, particularly wages.
I think perhaps the biggest and most noticeable change in during this recession, as far as it affects labour forces here and others that I'm in contact with, is perhaps that it's made them much more conscious of the need for greater productivity. And I think that throughout industry, not just here, but throughout industry, there is an increasing recognition on the part of workforces generally that we must get more productivity to pay for the wages. The days perhaps of 4 or 5 years ago when wage demands were made without any consideration of the consequences of the effects on costs or productivity, I think have gone, which I think is a good thing. And now we are settling to a much better pattern where there's a relationship between wage demands and productivity gains.
But there are also those who believe that this period during the early 80s of a high exchange rate, caused by high UK interest rates and foreign confidence in the pound based principally on North Sea oil, had disastrous consequences. Damage to our export markets, increased import penetration, destruction of our manufacturing industry. Well, since then, the pound's fallen anyway, made less attractive by a decline in oil prices, and also suffering as funds were switched into dollars in response to higher US interest rates. The decline in sterling has been mostly against the dollar rather than other currencies. There are many who welcome a fall in the exchange rate, and indeed think that it's still too high. And this view that a low pound is a necessary part of an expansionist policy is one we'll be touching on in a later programme.